All right, so you want to navigate without a compass. Huh. That's awesome.
It really is a fascinating skill.
Yeah. For this deep dive, we've got a bunch of articles all about wilderness navigation. Plus, we even check out Wikipedia's 10 essentials for hiking.
And are we going to try and synthesize all that?
Exactly. We're on a mission here.
Yeah.
To help you get comfortable finding your way, even if you're not exactly Bear Grylls,
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so cool about this. It's like we're tapping into this ancient knowledge.
Right. Like our ancestors used to do it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so first things first. How do we even figure out which way is north?
Oh, that's the big question.
Everyone always talks about using the sun or the stars, but is that all there is to it?
Well, those are definitely the classics. And they work really well.
Do they really?
Yeah, but there are some myths out there too. That whole thing about moss always growing on the north side of trees.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
Well, moss actually grows wherever it's damp and shady, which, doesn't always depend on direction.
So moss isn't the best bet.
Not really.
Okay, so let's talk about the sun then. One article mentioned using a stick's shadow to find north, but I've also heard about using a watch.
Uh-huh.
Do they both actually work?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah. So the shadow stick method, you literally just stick a stick upright in the ground on a sunny day, and then you mark the tip of the shadow. Then you wait half an hour or so, mark the new tip of the shadow. And the line between those 2 points, it basically runs east-west.
Okay.
And the first mark you made, that's always west.
So I can just remember that first mark is west.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. And what about the watch method? That one always seemed a bit like magic to me.
Oh, it's really not that complicated.
Yeah.
So if you're in the northern hemisphere, you hold your analog watch horizontally and point the hour hand at the sun.
Okay.
Then you picture a line that basically cuts the angle between the hour hand and the 12 o'clock mark in half.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And that line points south.
So just to clarify, I point the hour hand at the sun, imagine that line splitting the angle, and boom, I've got south. That's pretty cool. But what if I'm in Australia or somewhere south of the equator?
Ah, good question. It's a little different in the southern hemisphere. You'd actually point the 12 o'clock mark at the sun, and then that bisecting line between 12 and the hour hand points north.
So it's kind of reversed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'm definitely going to have to practice that one. But, finding north is only the beginning, right? What about knowing where to go from there?
Right. You've got to figure out where you're going.
I've got north now. Well,
That's where landmarks come in.
Okay. Landmarks.
They're basically your guideposts in the landscape,
So a tall tree, a weird-shaped rock, maybe a stream.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use them to walk in a straight line. Let's say you see that weird rock formation off in the distance, and then way off in the distance, there's a tall pine tree. Just line those two up in your vision and walk towards them, keeping them lined up the whole way.
Oh, that's smart. So I'm just making my own trail markers, basically.
Exactly. But you know what happens when there aren't any obvious landmarks?
Yeah, what about a dense forest where it's just trees everywhere?
That's when it gets tricky. And that's why you need to practice.
Practice what?
You need to practice paying attention to the little things. Changes in the vegetation, maybe the angle of the sun, even how the ground feels under your feet.
So it's about becoming more aware of your surroundings, basically. Developing a sixth sense for navigation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about what you see either.
Oh, right.
One of the articles mentioned using all your senses to navigate.
Oh, so using sound or even smell to orient yourself.
Yeah. Listen for the sound of a river rushing or the call of a certain bird. Maybe you can even hear traffic in the distance. All those sounds can give you clues.
Wow, I never thought about it like that, but it makes so much sense. It's like we're turning ourselves into human compasses, taking in information from all directions.
I love that analogy. That's exactly what it is.
And speaking of senses, I remember reading something about how water can be used as a navigational aid.
Oh.
I actually got a bit turned around on a hike once, and I just followed a stream downhill, and it led me right back to the trail.
It's not just luck. Water always flows downhill, right? So it carves out predictable paths and creates those valleys in the landscape. And understanding how the water flows in your area can really give you a sense of direction.
So knowing which way the river flows is just as useful as knowing which way is north.
Sometimes even more so. And some indigenous cultures actually use water names as mnemonic devices.
Mnemonic devices?
Yeah, like memory aids to help them navigate huge areas.
That's amazing. It really shows how deeply they understood the landscape.
It's incredible, isn't it? And one thing that stood out to me in these articles was how much they emphasized mental mapping.
Mental mapping. So you mean like creating a picture of a landscape in your head?
That's part of it.
Yeah.
But it's really more about understanding how all the different features in the environment relate to each other.
So it's not just visual. It's like a multi-sensory map that includes sound, smells, landmarks, and even like the feel of the ground beneath your feet.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more detailed that mental map becomes.
So it's like building a mental database
Yeah.
of the environment that you can access whenever you need it.
Yeah, it's like having an inner GPS.
And I'm guessing that having a good mental map makes you a much more confident navigator.
Oh, absolutely. It's about going beyond just following directions to actually understanding the landscape.
Right. It's like we're not just trying to get from point A to point B, but to really connect with the environment on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You know, one thing that often gets overlooked when we talk about navigation is the emotional side of things.
What do you mean?
I mean, like, the fear and anxiety that can come with getting lost, those emotions can really make things a lot harder.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I can imagine that.
So it's important to acknowledge those feelings and have strategies for dealing with them. One of the articles actually had this really interesting idea called the loss test.
The loss test. What's that?
Basically, you intentionally get lost in a safe and controlled environment.
Wait, so you're saying we should actually try to get lost to get better at not getting lost?
Well, in a way, yeah. The idea is to go to a park or some wooded area that you're somewhat familiar with and deliberately try to lose your bearing.
Okay, so it's like facing your fears in a controlled setting so that you're better prepared if it happens for real.
Exactly. But of course, there are safety guidelines for doing this.
Of course.
What are they? First, you always let someone know where you're going and when you'll be back. And set clear boundaries for your lost zone. Don't wander too far. And always choose an area with good cell phone reception, just in case.
Right. Safety first. So we've talked about finding north using landmarks, the power of water, mental mapping, even getting comfortable with getting lost. But what about beer?
Gear essential for any adventure.
Exactly. Is there like a list of must-have items that every adventurer should have with them?
Well, there's the famous 10 essentials.
Oh yeah, Wikipedia has a whole entry on that.
It's a good one to know.
Okay, so what's your take on it? What are some of the absolute must-haves in your opinion?
You know, I think the 10 essentials are really about being prepared for anything. Whether it's a minor inconvenience or something more serious, it's about being prepared, not paranoid.
That's a good way to put it. Being prepared, not paranoid. So tell me more about these essentials. What are some of the key items that you never leave home without?
Okay, well, a first aid kit is absolutely essential. And I'm not just talking about major injuries. Think about blisters, cuts, sprains, even just a simple headache. Having a well-stocked kit can make a huge difference.
Okay, first aid kit check. What else? I'm guessing extra water is pretty high on the list too.
Oh, absolutely. You never know when you'll need more water than you planned. Dehydration can be a real danger, especially if you're out hiking and exploring.
And I imagine finding a reliable water source isn't always easy, especially if you're in a more remote area.
Exactly. Which is why it's also a good idea to pack a water filter or some purification tablets, so you can drink from streams and springs safely, even if you're not sure about the water quality.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
So we've got first aid kit, extra water filter. What else comes to mind?
Well, a headlamp is another essential. You never know when you'll get caught out after dark, and fumbling around in the dark is never fun.
Especially if you're in unfamiliar territory.
Right. Plus, a headlamp frees up your hands, which is really helpful if you're navigating tricky terrain. And, you know, I think it's important to emphasize that the 10 essentials are really just a starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. It's about understanding the principles of preparedness, response, and self-sufficiency. You should always adapt the list to your own needs and the environment you're in.
So it's not about blindly following a list, but about using it as a framework to create your own personalized essentials kit.
Exactly. And the more you learn about navigation and wilderness skills, the more confident you'll become in customizing your gear to meet your own individual needs.
Which brings us to...
So, you know, when we're talking about these 10 essentials, they're not just for like, you know, hardcore wilderness expeditions.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes I think people hear 10 essentials and they picture like climbing Mount Everest or something.
Right. But honestly, these items are just as important on a regular hike.
Yeah, for sure. It's like having a spare tire in your car.
Exactly. You might not need it every day, but you're sure glad you have it when you do.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Speaking of being prepared, one of the articles I read talked about what to do if you actually do get lost despite your best efforts. Did you see that part?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is to just stop moving.
Really? Just stop.
Yeah. Resist that urge to just keep walking. Take a deep breath. Try to calm down. and then really look around.
Okay, so I've stopped. I'm breathing. Now what?
Think back to those landmarks we were talking about. Which way was the sun last time you checked? Can you hear anything that might give you a clue, like traffic or running water?
Right, using those sounds to create a sonic map.
Exactly. And this is where that mental mapping we talked about comes in handy. Even if you can't pinpoint your exact location, you should have at least a general sense of the layout.
Right, like my brain is kind of a backup GPS.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're feeling really lost, there's this technique where you basically explore each direction systematically.
Systematically, so not just wandering around aimlessly.
Oh, right. You walk a short distance in one direction, maybe like 10 paces or so. And if you don't recognize anything, you go back to your starting point and try a different direction.
It's supposed to be a more methodical way of searching.
Exactly. It can help you get your bearings again. And it's funny, people always talk about those more subtle nature clues, like how moss grows more on the north side of trees. Did you ever hear that one?
Oh, yeah. Is there any truth to that?
Oh, well, it's one of those things that's partially true, but not always reliable. Moss does tend to prefer shadier spots, and sometimes that might be the north side of a tree. But it's not a guarantee.
So it's not the most reliable method.
Definitely not.
No.
It's better to rely on more proven techniques. But, one of the articles mentioned practicing navigation skills in everyday life, even when you're not out in the wilderness.
Oh, yeah, like how?
Just pay attention to your surroundings when you're walking around your neighborhood. Notice landmarks, street names, the direction of the sun. You're basically building that mental map, even in a familiar environment.
Like a mental workout for my navigation skills.
Exactly. And there was this other suggestion about actually drawing your own maps after exploring an area.
Did you ever try that?
I have. It's a great way to reinforce those mental connections. It doesn't have to be a work of art, just a simple sketch that helps you remember what you saw.
I like that. It's like we're becoming our own cartographers.
Exactly. I think it's really empowering to realize that we don't always need technology to find our way.
Yeah, there's something really satisfying about relying on your own senses and knowledge.
Totally. It's like we're rediscovering this ancient skill that's been passed down through generations.
And speaking of ancient skills, remember that Estado P acronym we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah, for when you realize you're really lost.
Yeah. Can you remind me what it stands for again?
So the S stands for sit down.
Okay, sit down.
Which can be hard to do when you're panicking, but it's important to take a moment to collect yourself.
Right. And T?
T is for think. Once you've calmed down a bit, start thinking through the situation. What do you know about your location? What landmarks do you remember seeing? What resources do you have with you?
Got it. Think. What about O?
O is for observe. Really look around. Are there any natural features that could help you figure out where you are or which way to go?
Observe. Okay, and P?
P stands for plan. Based on what you've observed and what you know, come up with a plan of action. Should you stay put and wait for help? Should you try to retrace your steps? Or is there a safe direction you can follow?
Wow, that's so helpful. Stop P.
Hey.
Sit down, think. Observe, plan. Such a simple acronym, but it packs in a lot of wisdom.
It really does. And something that struck me while we were reading about this is how important emotional control is for navigation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When you're freaking out, it's hard to think straight.
Exactly. And that's where things like the loss test can be so valuable. By intentionally putting ourselves in tough situations, but in a safe environment, we can build up that resilience.
Right. We're training our brains to stay calm under pressure.
Exactly. And one of the articles even talked about embracing the feeling of being lost.
Really embracing it.
Yeah, instead of seeing it as a negative experience, they were saying we should reframe it as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery.
I like that. It's like shifting our mindset from fear and frustration to curiosity and adventure.
Exactly. And this whole conversation about navigation and resilience has me thinking about the connection between navigation skills and survival skills.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
How so?
Well, navigation is about finding your way. But survival is about staying alive and well until you can either get back to safety or help arrives.
Right. Like knowing how to build a fire, find water, create shelter, administer first aid. Those skills are even more important if you're lost or injured.
Exactly. And while we often think of them as separate things, navigation and survival skills really go hand in hand. Yeah, they work together to keep us safe in the wilderness.
Exactly. Another concept that came up in the articles was this idea of reading the landscape.
Reading the landscape. What does that mean?
It's about going beyond just recognizing landmarks. It's about observing those subtle cues and patterns in nature that can tell you a lot about your surroundings.
Okay, so like what kind of cues?
We'll take trees, for example. They grow differently depending on where they are and how much wind and sun they get. Trees on a windy ridge will be all stunted and gnarled, while trees in a sheltered valley will grow tall and straight.
Oh yeah, I've definitely noticed that.
Yeah.
But I never thought about it in terms of navigation.
Right. It's like nature is giving us clues all the time.
We just have to learn how to read them.
Exactly. And it's not just trees. Look at the vegetation, the way the sun hits the ground, the direction the water flows. It all tells a story.
It's like learning nature's language.
I love that. And the articles also talked about how animals are amazing navigators.
Yeah, animals have that built-in GPS.
They really do. Pay attention to which way birds are flying in the morning and evening. See how animals use trails and landmarks to get around. They've been living in these environments for generations, so they know what they're doing.
We can learn a lot from them.
For sure. One of the articles also emphasized the importance of quieting the mind when you're out in nature.
Why is that important for navigation?
Well, when our minds are racing, it's hard to be present and aware of our surroundings. But when we quiet our minds, we open ourselves up to a whole new level of perception.
It's like we're tuning out the noise of our thoughts so we can hear the whispers of nature.
Exactly. And as we develop that awareness, we start to see the world in a different way. It's not just about finding our way, but about understanding our place within the web of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And one of the articles mentioned this concept of wander walks. Have you heard of those?
Yeah, it's basically where you go for a walk with no destination in mind.
You just wander.
Exactly. You let your curiosity and intuition guide you.
So it's like a more mindful way of exploring.
It is. It's about being open to the unexpected and seeing where the path takes you. You never know what you might discover.
Maybe that's the whole point in navigation. It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about the journey itself.
I think you're right. It's about embracing the unknown and trusting that we'll find our way even if it's not the way we planned.
After all this talk about finding our way, I keep thinking about that idea of intentionally getting lost.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny concept, right? Like we spend all this time learning how to not get lost, and then we're like, hey, let's go get lost on purpose.
It seems counterintuitive, but I think there's something to it. We're so used to having our lives planned out to the minute, our GPS tells us exactly where to go. Maybe there's something freeing about just letting go of all that and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think so. It's like giving ourselves permission to be surprised, rediscovering that sense of adventure.
Right. And one of the articles called this a wander walk, just heading out with no set destination and letting your curiosity lead the way.
Exactly. It's about embracing those unexpected moments. The ones you never could have planned for.
So it's not about getting lost in the sense of feeling scared or disoriented. It's more about letting go of the map, both literally and figuratively.
Right. It's about being open to the unexpected and trusting that you'll find your way, even if it's not the way you originally intended.
And who knows, maybe you'll stumble upon something amazing along the way.
Exactly. Like a hidden waterfall or a breathtaking view, things you would have missed if you had just stuck to the trail.
There's that saying, not all those who wander are lost.
I love that quote. It's so true. Sometimes you have to get lost to really find yourself.
And, this whole idea of exploration ties back to that concept of nature as a mentor. When we're open to learning, nature can teach us so much.
Oh, absolutely. Nature has so much wisdom to offer. We just have to be willing to listen.
One thing I noticed in the articles was how much they emphasized the importance of slowing down and really paying attention.
Yeah.
Something that's so hard to do in our busy world.
It really is. We're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation. It's easy to become numb to the beauty around us.
But when we do slow down and really observe nature, it's like seeing it with fresh eyes.
And one of the articles suggested engaging all of our senses when we're exploring.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Don't just look, but really see the details of a leaf or a flower. Listen to the bird song and the wind in the trees. Feel the texture of the bark or the coolness of the moss.
It's about being fully present in the moment, experiencing nature with all of our senses.
Exactly. And when we do that, we create a much deeper connection with the natural world.
And one of the articles even suggested that this kind of sensory exploration can help us develop our intuition.
It makes sense. The more attuned we are to our surroundings, the more likely we are to pick up on subtle cues and patterns.
It's like we're developing a sixth sense for navigating the world.
I like that. And as we become more aware, we become more intuitive, more responsive to the world around us, and more in tune with our own inner compass.
You know what I'm realizing? This isn't just about navigation. It's about a whole way of being in the world.
I think you're right. It's about being present, aware, and trusting our instincts. It's about recognizing that we have everything we need within ourselves to navigate the complexities of life.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into navigating without a compass. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and feel inspired to embark on your own explorations, both out in the wilderness and within yourselves. Thanks for joining us.